Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again to Frieda for opening up her home to us for our class. I wanted just to mention, get up here, our class today is the Refuah Shelema of Sophia Malka Reina Bat Frieda and Leilun Nishmat Eliyahu Ben Simbol. Feel free to add any names, the Leilun Nishmat or the Refuah Shelema. All the words of Torah that we share and the berachot that are made will be in those honors. Okay. In the 1950s, there was a social science experiment that was done by a man named Mutzafer Sharif. And the experiment is quite interesting. He took 22 11-year-old boys and he brought them to like a wilderness camp, randomly separated them into two groups. And actually the two groups didn't know in the beginning that there was another group. So he just put them 11 and 11, separated them. They had no idea that the other group existed. And he did a bunch of team building exercise with each group individually. So they hiked together, they swam together. They had basically like a camp experience, much of what anybody who's gone to sleepaway camp has experienced. You have your own bunk. They made a flag. They gave themselves a bunk name. They had a song. For 2 weeks, they just totally immersed themselves with each other, built strong bonds and camaraderie within their group. In stage 2, he took these two groups and he introduced them to each other in a series of competitions. They started to play sports against each other. They started to have a lot of, different competitions, different sporting events, things like that. And what they noticed that in this stage, tension started to run really high. Take two groups of 11-year-old boys who have an identity with each other, pit them against each other in competition. All of a sudden, they got very aggressive. There was a lot of fierce, competition. But even he started to notice that they started making up derogatory songs about the other team. They started to burn each other's flags. They started to get very, very intense of us versus them. Then he tried to, in stage 3, do what they call, he calls it an integrated phase, where he then had them do a number of experiences like watch movies together, have a barbecue together, try to bring the two to sort of lessen the tension and reconciliate, and it didn't work. And he found that a lot of these events ended in fights. There was a lot of food fighting and throwing and vandalism. Just trying to give them healthy experiences of interaction and socializing with each other didn't seem to work in trying to get those tensions to go away. It wasn't until he introduced stage 4 that he found out the key to trying to get these two groups to sort of lower their defense shields of their identities and start to work together and start to get to know each other and build bonds with each other. What did he do in stage 4? He orchestrated a series of problems that the two groups could not solve without helping each other. So on the campground, he created a water problem that the running water stopped, and the two groups had to work together to bring the water back into the camp. And he did a number of different exercises like this, staging different issues for them, which one group could not solve on their own. They needed to come together and work together to solve the problem. And what did he find? That in the spirit of working together to solve common problems, all of a sudden he started to see that those past tensions which had grown in stage 2, all of the fighting and the derision and the derogatory songs and the name calling, all of that started to melt away. And by the end of the trip, as they were bringing, he gave out a lot of prizes, he gave out a lot of awards, only to the winning bunk, so to speak. He found that on the way home, the winning bunk used their money to purchase food and drinks for the losers, right? That all of a sudden kindness started to come out by the end of the experiment. What I think his experiment teaches us is something very profound about human interactions, about how people go from maybe having discord with each other, not getting along, fighting, and eventually try to repair their relationship. The way you could repair a relationship is by solving problems together, is by trying to work together to handle a particular issue. by going out and helping the other person. You cannot artificially create love and bonding and friendship between two people just by putting them in the same room together, just by giving them pleasurable experiences together. It's not going to happen. If there's already tension and animosity between the two groups who identify differently, it's going to be very hard to just stick them in a room and assume that they're going to get together. Think segregation in the 1960s when they tried to mix schools after they had, racial, separate schools, blacks, whites. Then they tried to integrate schools. Well, just putting whites and blacks together in the same school isn't all of a sudden going to get them to realize that, we should be nice to them. In fact, it makes the tensions even worse. It's only when they're able to come together in solving a problem and achieving a common goal and helping each other that they start to realize, oh, we share a common bond of humanity together. The problems that they experience are the same problems that I have, and we can work together to solve. And when you're in the process of working together to solve, all of a sudden you start to uncover the human side of the other person, and you build a bond, and kindness starts to come out.
Say this reminds me of September 11th, when after people really started going out and helping one another, and all of a sudden all the differences and there was much less, I feel like, races, there were just things that diminished because everyone was working towards a common goal.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we do see very often that natural disasters, calamities, terrorism, when people are backed into a corner, and really it just becomes a matter of life and death, right? And so the only thing that comes out is just the fact that you're a human being, I'm a human being, and we should work together to save each other. All of a sudden, all those other silly social things that oftentimes get in the way just seem to be not relevant anymore. I don't know how many people have seen the movie Remember the Titans. Yeah, that was the movie that's what I was building on with that thing, right? All of a sudden, sports, by the way, has a very unique ability to sometimes be able to do that, right? But again, you're creating a bond and everybody kind of shares that, and it becomes us against everybody. All of a sudden, it doesn't matter what your skin color is, what mine, what religion you are, what mine. We're working to solve a common problem, and we're drawing inspiration off each other.
As a matter of fact, so I had my son in public school, small little blonde kid, kippah, in a school of no one else. He didn't get along with this big black kid. Mm-hmm. No idea why. He didn't like him. He didn't like him. It could have been racial. It could have been Jewish. Could have been whatever. One day they get into a fight. Not physical, but they get into a fight. So the principal said, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm locking them in a room. Tomorrow they have to stay in a room, finish a project together. Mm-hmm. That's their thing. By the end of that day, it took one day for them to, and if they don't finish it that day, they have to go back in the class and do the same thing. By one day, they finished the project. They never had a problem with each other. They became friends.
Right.
Right. Commonality.
Yeah, solving a problem together and seeing how you work together to do that, and then for sure, yeah. Okay, I'm glad you trusted them, or I don't know how much of a choice you had, but yes, I think we see this intuitively in a lot of different settings, and I think it comes up in something in this week's parasha, which you could already trace this idea fundamentally back to the Torah. So what I want to do for you is to present you with just one mitzvah of the many mitzvot that are mentioned in this week's parasha. This week's parasha is called Parashat Mishpatim. Literally, Mishpatim means laws. And so it is what its name says. It's just basically a mixture of all different types of laws from start to finish, right after we got the Torah. But one common thread amongst the majority of the laws in this week's parasha is they deal with interpersonal relationships. Things like monetary law, marriage law, physical damages, damaging somebody's property, watching something for someone and losing the object, returning lost objects. A lot of ben adam lachavero laws are discussed in this week's parasha. I want to read to you two pisukim, one mitzvah, that really in its language stands out and illustrates this idea. And then I also want to mention some other ideas that relate to it as well. In chapter 23, verse 4 and 5 of this week's parasha, it says the following. Ki tivga shor oyivcha. If you come across the ox of your enemy, your oyev, you come across the ox of your enemy, or hamoro, or your enemy's donkey, to'eh, who is straying off the path. He's lost, right? Just a random stray animal that you don't know where the owner is, but you know who this belongs to, but you can't see where he is. Hashev teshivenu lo. You must be sure to return his property to him. and this could be obviously an ox and a donkey is just an example here. If you find the lost object of somebody whom you despise, is your enemy, someone you don't like, you have a responsibility. The Torah says with double language, you shall surely return him or her that object. Second verse, when you see the donkey of your enemy, the one who hates you or you hate them, squatting underneath the burden, the animal is struggling to hold up this very heavy load on its back. And you can see the animal is laboring and you don't know where the owner is, or the owner is just not paying attention or whatnot. And you have to come and help the animal to unpack the load off of its back. This is like a rhetorical question. Will you refrain from helping the animal and helping the load come down? Azov ta azov imo. Again, double language. You shall surely release the burden off of the animal. So we have these two mitzvot are basically very similar. A person sees a person's property lost or straying, and it's not somebody who they like. It's someone who they have tension with. It's someone who they might have animosity towards, or they have animosity towards you. You have a responsibility to jump into action and to help that person, or at the very least to help the animal which is struggling with the burden which it's holding. It's not a coincidence that the Torah phrases this mitzvah in terms of helping your enemy in this situation. There is a parallel pasuk later in the Torah, in the book of Devarim, which discusses helping your neighbor, your friend. These verses specifically talk about helping your enemy, sona'acha, the one who hates you or the one that you hate. And that's very strong language for the Torah to use. It does not use that language very often or haphazardly. Your enemy, your oyev, is lost his property. You must go and return it to them. You must go and help them. So there's a few important things I think here to pay attention to in this mitzvah that I think are very, very important concepts that give us a fundamental understanding of how Judaism says we're supposed to relate to other people in the society. The first thing is, aren't we not supposed to have any enemies? Aren't we not supposed to hate anybody? The Torah tells us that you should not hate anybody in your heart. So what does it even mean that a person has an enemy or someone who hates them or someone who you hate? Aren't we supposed to just deny these concepts outright? Who exactly is this person, this fictitious sona'acha, hater or hatred that you have for the other person? What's really going on over here? Any takers who this person might actually be? Okay.
Them out and everything. So there is some sort of.
So there is evil in the world, and I would say we have to hate evil. We have to despise evil, and our job should be to cleanse the world of evil. Unfortunately, sometimes that requires us, when people are unwilling to change, to get rid of certain people. But ideally speaking, we would want to change the behaviors of the people and the philosophy of the people, so we don't have to actually get rid of the people themselves, but we hate the evil. So it could be that the oyev over here is an idolater, someone who doesn't agree with the philosophies and the moral concepts of the Torah, someone who's a corrupt individual. That is one option that the rabbis give here. Good. Another one that the rabbis give is an apostate, someone who has heretical beliefs and is convincing other people of those heretical beliefs. So they're something of a cancer to the society and to the Jewish group at large. Any other options?
Be like, it's only natural sometimes to hate people, and so you have to recognize that.
Okay, good. So when would it be natural for that to sometimes be the case? Excellent, good. So I'll read to you a very, very hard to stomach line over here by the rabbis. But you have to sometimes read these lines and process them. Let me make sure that I can find it here. It's chapter 23, verse 4. The rabbis say, who might this person be? It's a mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael. So first they say, Rabbi Oshaya taught the Torah here refers to an animal belonging to an idolatrous Gentile. So that's somebody who we have maybe animosity towards. Then he gives another option. Rabbi Eliezer taught we're referring to a convert who's relapsed to his former ways. Somebody who converted to Judaism and then went back to his other ways. That could be very dangerous because that gives people the impression, oh, you can just like opt out of Judaism, which we can't really do. Rabbi Yitzhak taught it refers to an apostate Jew. That was Jenny's one. Rabbi Natan taught, actually the verse is talking about a neighboring Jew, your neighbor. When might be the case? Why then does the Torah call him an enemy? It is a case, for example, when the owner of the ox had previously beaten the finder's son who had fought with him. In such circumstances, the owner is at that moment the finder's enemy. Fascinating. He says, imagine, this is like really hard to picture and might hard to stomach. Imagine you found the property of somebody who hit your child. Are you returning that property to that person? I think most of us would probably say no way, right? If they break it and with a little note, this is for you, right? Exactly. So all of us are going to have those. All of us are going to have those, this instincts. Basically, at that moment, because of what that person did to you, something egregious, something over the line, you are going to have bad feelings towards that person, and rightfully so that you're going to have bad feelings towards that person. Even then, the Torah says, you know what you need to do? You have to put your bad feelings aside for that person and still do the right thing. And still do the right thing. In the end of the day, at that moment, returning a lost object is the right thing to do, regardless of what that person did for you. And when you return that lost object, you maintained your humanity. What that person did is their business. And we'll talk about what might happen in the reaction from that person if you do something like that. But you have a responsibility at that moment to put your negative feelings aside for that person and to do the right thing regardless of what your emotions tell you to do. This is very, very, very hard. I would not profess that this is a simple thing, but this is what the Torah demands of us, calls of us, and might be telling us is the best way for us to live. Because what do we gain by holding back that object and not returning, right? We might gain a momentary feeling of satisfaction, like, oh, you did this to me, I'm doing something to you. That revenge is sweet kind of feeling. But ultimately, the Torah says you've done something much worse to yourself, right? You've damaged your humanity. You've damaged your character. You've allowed your emotions and your feelings to get in the way of doing what you feel is the right thing, right? And to a degree, there's that kill them with kindness type approach, right? But even that's not what the Torah is talking about. Like, don't even do it with the, here, I'm going to do it. Here's your stuff back, even though you're a terrible person. That's bearing the grudge. The Torah says you have to, at that moment, totally wipe your emotions clean and say, I saw that you lost your object. Here it is back for you. And enjoy. Have a great day, right? That is really, really difficult stuff to do. We could all appreciate how hard that is to do. But that is what the Torah is asking of us, is expecting of us, and wants to ultimately have us achieve to better our character. And that's really what this is all about. It's about character improvement in this way. So I want to read to you another comment. Before I do that, does anybody have any comments about that? Or how does that idea make you feel? It could be a hard one, yeah.
I'm thinking of a quote that I actually used speaking to someone today. I was dealing with someone who was about a grudge, and I always remind myself of this quote. Bearing a grudge is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And I'm thinking of, like you're saying, like if you gave the person back the thing, if you didn't give the person back the thing you feel
Right.
bad, you gave it to them and you like threw it at them. It demeans you. It doesn't make them
Right.
any better. Or it makes them any worse either. You're ruining yourself
Right.
by doing things like that, rather than you building yourself up by
Right.
just being more
So
grateful.
clearly, so just thinking of it from a selfish perspective, the Torah is telling you you're better off on your own. You want to maintain who you are as a person. If you want to elevate yourself, feel good about yourself, feel like then it requires you to push that aside purely from a selfish perspective, right? In a moment, I'll also show you how there is an self-preservation maybe, but yeah, meaning you're thinking about what is the right thing for me? How will I feel good about myself? How will I be able to move on from this? You're not as much thinking about what this is going to do for the other person as much as you're saying this is the right thing to do and I need to do what's right for me, right? So you are kind of looking at it from your perspective, but that is one benefit and one thing that the Torah is directing us towards.
It also helps society and the community.
That's the other side of it.
Right, and pay it, maybe the other person will realize and pay it forward, and just bettering yourself could bring everyone else.
Absolutely, right? And ultimately you're sending a very powerful message that this is the type of society I want to live in, right? we're all going to have disputes with each other. There's always going to be reasons why we are harboring negative feelings against each other, right? So there's always an excuse not to do something good for another person, unless they're your best friend or you love them or something like that. But there's so many people in our circles. There's so many people in our communities, in our schools, in our synagogues, and beyond, that they're not always the best people, and we're not going to get along with every single person, right? So if we always sought retribution against others, if we could not bring ourselves to do a right thing for somebody who maybe isn't our number one fan, then the society can't function. Things can't go on. We want to live in a society where people can put their own personal petty emotions aside, right? And I shouldn't say the word petty, because maybe sometimes it's not so petty. Maybe sometimes it is genuine. But nevertheless, to put those feelings aside, to be able to do the right thing so that we could all coexist with each other. And I'm going to take this by the end a step further, thinking about the experiment that we started with in the very beginning, which I'm going to come back to. Marilyn, you wanted to say something?
Something like that about this. What can I say? There's an interesting concept where you can think about them as the people is like a messenger. So if something's happening, you could get upset about it, but remember.
And you could target that person.
Not allowing it. So be curious, what lesson were you supposed to learn? What were you supposed to gain from this experience?
Right.
Learn from it, grow from it. Don't have a grudge on this person. They're just a messenger.
So looking at people in that context, right, as the messenger of Hashem, and trying to focus and reflect on how this event affects you and how you could grow from it and how you could be better, is a great way of deflecting the negative feelings towards that individual in a positive direction, and focusing it inward to say, how am I going to become better as a result of this interaction? What can I do in a different way? And I could still get on board with this person in the future, perhaps. Obviously, still something needs to happen. Forgiveness, reconciliation, there may not need to be a follow-up conversation, because I don't think it's so healthy all of the time to just say, well, I don't need to have it. You still need to work through the relationship with that person, right? I hesitate only because sometimes people will say, oh, it's from Hashem, so it's okay, I'm just going to leave it alone. You can't leave it alone either, because you do have to be able to get along with people. You can't just look at everybody as angels of God, because then you'll never have relationships with people. So you do also sometimes have to work through the relationship, but to push away, to deflect or redirect those negative feelings, that is an excellent way of doing it as well. I want to share with you a quick word from the Rambam's son, Rabbeinu Avraham ben Harambam, who also brings out these 2 points, right? He talks about, aren't we supposed to not hate anybody? Why are we talking about someone who's your enemy? And so again, he says, here he has a little different approach. He says, the sages resolve this difficulty by explaining that the hated individual mentioned in the current verse must be someone who transgresses the laws of the Torah. You're a very religious person. You obey a certain way of conduct, and you see another person who's not doing the laws of the Torah. Now, there is, to a degree, a requirement for you to criticize or to not appreciate that action, to hate that action which that person has done, right? And yet, the Torah says, even in that moment that this person is a wicked person, who's not doing the right thing or sinning, you still have a responsibility to treat him humanely and to provide him with the proper social needs that everybody deserves. That right is still there for him despite whatever he does. Then he continues. He says, nevertheless, God insists that even though such a sinner deserves to be loathed for his conduct, his neighbors should help him to retrieve his lost property. Why? For the owner might one day repent his evil ways or bequeath his estate to heirs who are wholesome and deserving. Who are you to make the decision that somebody should not get their property back because they're not a good person? What does their property have to do with who they are? Their property is their property. God has given that property to them. The fact that they might not be a good person or they might not have acted right towards you should have no bearing on their property. What if they do teshuvah? What if they ask for forgiveness? What if they come back? What if it heals the process? So you have no right to damage their property, which is not yours, and you have no right, you have no say over it, just because that you feel that person doesn't deserve to get their property back. Rabbi Abraham says, we have no jurisdiction over that. You at that point, you turn around and say, look, God will deal with that person however he sees fit. I cannot take the consequences into my own hand and determine this is the punishment that this person deserves. They don't deserve to get their iPad back because they were mean to me. The two have nothing to do with each other, right? Yeah. You have no right to be in that situation. Exactly. You cannot play God at that point. And God is telling you, here's what I want you to do, and I'll handle the rest from there. Furthermore, he says, we might learn that the reason for this commandment is not merely the exercise of compassion toward the unfortunate owner of the animal, but also to train the finder in developing a positive character. This is the point that Julie was mentioning before. In the end of the day, even if you don't think about that person and you think about yourself, you want to build your character. You want to make yourself a more compassionate person. You want to perfect and refine who you are as an individual. And in order to do that, you have to do the right thing in each situation, regardless of whether someone else is doing the wrong thing in a different situation. So the Rabbeinu Avraham is telling us a couple of other important things. So far, we've seen that you have to show compassion for everybody. We have to be ourselves and try to grow in ourselves. And the idea that we can't play God, we don't have jurisdiction over certain things. Our job is to do the right thing in those situations. This is so far what we've seen and explored in this
Is
mitzvah.
that why also they use animal? Because if you're gonna help an animal, then obviously you're gonna help all human beings.
So I'm going to come to the animal point. Excellent. Linda transitioned me into my next point. The animal here is significant because there's another entity that's involved over here. It's not just an inanimate object now. Now we're talking about a living thing that's also involved in the story. So now we come to point number 2. In the second of the Pesukim, we saw the animal is laboring. So even if you don't like the person who owns this animal, have compassion on the animal itself. And the Torah teaches us to have compassion on all living things. There is an idea of tsa'ar ba'alei chayim. Pain and suffering to any living thing is something that as Jews we do not tolerate. We certainly don't inflict pain on living things, and we don't stand by idly while things go in pain, and we have the opportunity to be able to help. So even if you're not interested in the person, think of the innocent bystander over here, which is the animal that you have a responsibility to go in and help. Rabbi Sachs mentions a beautiful point. He says, I know in this example it's an animal, but this can happen amongst humans as well. How many times does a fight between us and somebody else cause damage to a third party who is innocent in that interaction, right? 2 adults are getting into a fight, right? Or a business falls apart. A partnership doesn't go well. The parents, what do they say to the kids? Don't speak to each other, right? Our business didn't go well. We got into a fight. Don't talk to that person's kid, right? Parents will do this all the time. Why should the children suffer because the parents are having a fight? Why should they not allowed to be friends? Why should they be taught to disagree with each other, to dislike each other because of something that's going on amongst the parents, right? This is not, the Torah is saying, don't allow your differences with that person, that owner, to allow somebody else to suffer innocently. That animal that's sitting there holding that burden is bearing the weight of your fight. You need to put your differences aside and allow this side party to thrive and to flourish. You have to help them. Handle your business on the side, but don't take out your issues on a third innocent party. That's where the animal comes into play. And so that's the idea of the tsa'ar ba'alei chayim, the innocent bystander that's also involved here. And that's why the Torah portrays this picture in terms of a soneh, a hater. Leave your hatred somewhere else. Resolve your conflict on the side. Don't let it seep into other people who don't deserve to be wronged as a result of whatever's going on in your life. Another very interesting point for us to be able to bring up. So far we're talking about our own character. We're making sure to take care of other people who might be involved. We're also talking about treating everybody b'tselem Elokim, no matter if they're a non-Jew, if they're a convert, if they have different beliefs, if they're a sinner, there's always opportunities for teshuvah. But here comes, I think, the most compelling and most important part of this whole conversation, and it takes us back to the social science experiment that we started with. The idea that ultimately, what does the Torah want us to do? It wants us to reconcile those feelings, right? So far, everything we spoke about is either focusing on myself, trying to become better, or helping the innocent bystander to become better. It doesn't actually attack the issue that's going on between the two people. It's just saying, don't let that issue make you do the wrong thing. But now the Torah might be giving us an even deeper layer. You want to know why this might be happening? Your enemy's animal is in a situation where you have an opportunity to help. Maybe that's God's way of saying, here's your chance to fix it. Here's how you're going to eventually come back to that person, to work out your differences because you together can help out this situation. There's a shared problem here now. This guy's animal is holding a burden that it can't carry. You go in to help and you do it together with him. You solve the problem together. Who's to say that in the course of helping each other, you don't all of a sudden realize, hey, this person's not as bad as I thought. Wow, maybe I misjudged them. Maybe I thought about them too quickly. Maybe I didn't really understand the situation of what happened the first time it happened. I was too quick to make a determination about what it is that they were doing and why they were doing it. Through the process of helping each other, you can learn to solve the differences. And I think the rabbis point this out because the rabbis have a very interesting comment, and then I'll take Julie's point. The rabbis say, notice one very important word at the end of the pasuk, which I didn't emphasize at the beginning for a very reason. It says, if you see your enemy's donkey squatting under its burden, will you abandon him? Don't abandon him. Azov to Azov, help release the burden. Imo. What does imo mean? With him. What do the rabbis say? The rabbis have a very interesting scenario. They say, oh, what if the owner doesn't want to help you help the animal, right? The owner of the animal is watching his animal squat, and he's like, oh, guess what? The Torah requires somebody else to come help me. So I'm just going to sit down on the side, and someone else is going to go ahead and do it for me, right? The Torah says, if the owner doesn't want to do it with you, then nobody has the obligation to go and help. You don't have the obligation to help unless the owner is going to do it for himself also. Why might that be the case? Why does the owner have to participate with the person who's helping? Exactly. The Torah is saying, if he's not going to help you together, then that issue is not going to get repaired, right? He's taking advantage. He's manipulating. The issue is not going to come. Before I get to that, a lot of other people say what? There's a certain social contract. There's reciprocity, right? I do for you, you do for me, right? I can't help someone who's not willing to help themselves, right? The Torah is sending a very powerful message. If the owner is not going to help his own animal, it's his property. If he's not willing to do it himself, then no one else has an obligation to do it because you can't help somebody who's not willing to help themselves, right? The Klei Akar brings up a very beautiful point about charity on this point as well. He says the following. The language of this verse indicates that it is only when the owner of the animal is prepared to work himself toward freeing the struggling donkey that the passerby is required to assist him. If the individual orders the newcomer to do the work himself while he sits and watches, then the latter is entitled to refrain from helping him. This verse teaches us what response we can give to some poor individuals among us who impose their livelihoods on the community. These people refuse to work even though they are capable of earning an honest living and support their hungry family. They then have the temerity to complain that they are not being given enough charity. This is not what God has commanded. Rather, just as in our case, the passerby must work with the animal's owner to unload the donkey or help the beast stand up, so too must the poor be willing to do whatever he can to raise himself out of his own poverty. If the pauper is still unable to stand on his own, it is then incumbent upon the neighbors to feed him and to encourage him. The community must provide for whatever he's lacking. People have to be there to help themselves. If they're not going to help themselves, then nobody has an obligation to go ahead and help them, right? This is, I heard a fascinating distinction. We call these two different types of people. Some people are rescuers and some people are helpers. Now, rescuers sounds like a very good thing, but you don't want to be a rescuer. A rescuer is somebody who's always trying to bail people out of situations when they don't try to help themselves. They don't ask for help and you're helping them. You're crossing a boundary, trying to help someone who's not asking for help, who doesn't want your help, or is not trying to get help. And you're just constantly taking them out of that situation over and over again. You're not helping them, right? You're enabling them. It's called learned helplessness. You're teaching them to be helpless because every time they're helpless, somebody comes, they just sit back and wait for someone to come in and rescue them. He says it's not a good way to be. Now, sometimes a person is in a really bad situation where they just need a little bit of rescuing to eventually get them to helping. But ultimately, in the average case, you don't want to be in a situation where you're constantly rescuing. If you're rescuing, that means that you're enabling, you're teaching learned helplessness. You want to be helping. Helping is, I'm here for you to support when you ask me for help. If you want help, if you're interested in getting help, I'm here to provide for you whatever it is that you need. You ask me for help, I will give you help, right? I'm there to support you. That is the type of role that we as parents, leaders, community members want to try to do for others. The rabbis say lending money to somebody is much better than giving charity to somebody. Because when you lend money to them, you're helping them to stand on their own 2 feet. You're giving it to them in a moral and dignified way. And chances are they asked you to borrow money. Versus if somebody is asking for charity, it means that they're already in a very bad situation where you're coming to rescue them. You should have probably been there to help them a lot earlier on. So the Klei Akkad over here says a fundamental idea. People have to be willing to help themselves, and then you can go ahead and help them. If they're not going to help themselves, it's going to be almost impossible, and if you even should in the first place. But I think the last point is the idea that you have to do it with him, because that's what's going to create the love between the two of you. How are you going to get rid of the animosity, the tension, the hatred? By working together. I often tell students, right, when we pair them up in groups, so sometimes we give them the option to choose their own partners. Of course, they're going to choose their best friend, right? But sometimes we make the partners for them. And that's when we act very cruelly and put them with the person that they don't like, right? Okay, you're going to work with him, right? So, but there's a method to the madness, because if they can understand it and we try to explain it to them, is that, okay, yes, sometimes you're going to work with this person, or sometimes it's going to be random. Sometimes you're going to get partnered up in a project with someone who's not your best friend, somebody you might have a little bit of beef with at some point. That's the perfect opportunity for you to be able to learn about this person, for you to really get in touch with who they are, for you to take away your reservations and your judgments about them, work together to solve a problem and realize maybe they're not as bad as I really thought that it was. And if they work together genuinely, as Marilyn pointed out, and I'm sure many of you have experienced with your own children and your own lives, all of a sudden you start to realize maybe this wasn't so bad after all, or at least I don't have the same persona of this person, that those negative feelings that I have are at least washed away for the time being. So the Torah is telling us, turn your enemy into somebody who you can love, who you can get on the same page with. By which way? By helping them, by being there to support them, and by working together with them to be able to solve that problem. That's how the Torah is presenting it to us. And the quote in Avot Rabbi Natan is, who is a hero? One who turns his enemy into a friend. And it's very hard. You can't just expect people to love their enemy, right? Christians love to say, love your enemy. Loving your enemy only happens by helping your enemy. If you help them, then you will come to realize there's not as much that threatens me. I can get rid of those negative feelings and be able to connect with them. Who's a hero? Someone who could turn their enemy into a friend. Questions, comments, or thoughts? Yeah. Okay. You're able to question.
I think that said was on target for someone. I think enemy is a stronger word than someone that you can work something out.
Okay.
For someone to be your enemy, either it could be someone like Jenny said, like a heretic who maybe you don't want to get close to because they could be a bad influence, or they can, influence, whatever, just be a bad. Or it could be someone who has done something that is a true enemy, that has done something so irreparable that many years later, damage is still done. It's not somebody that you can work together and help each other and realize that they really do have good qualities. I just think that's a reality.
I think there's definitely degrees for sure. But even if we can't work together to totally change our understanding, maybe that's a little bit too rainbows and roses, right? But maybe at least we can maintain again our own humanity. We can keep our compassion. We can do the right thing, right? But I think also if it can be done enough times, maybe not once, maybe twice, maybe it's different situations that a person gets stuck into, maybe it can progress. Maybe it can get out of that. Maybe there is forgiveness that can be offered from both parties to the other. I think you want to let's strive for that. That's what the Torah wants us to strive for at all times. I firmly believe that. I know it's hard. I know it might seem a little bit, not practical, but I think the Torah always wants us to strive for that. It always wants us to strive for that. That's why that example is so, graphic. The idea of someone else beating my child and I'm now supposed to help them. is the idea that maybe there isn't anything that is so irreparable. We feel it's irreparable, but maybe there isn't something in this world that is so irreparable that we can't try to slowly take away some of those feelings. Will we get to the end? Maybe not, probably not, but there's maybe layers, there's maybe steps to take. The goal is to try to strive for that.
I just feel there's a distinction between forgiveness in the heart and but keeping a distance and all that.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. You could help somebody for a particular situation and then not necessarily become their best buddy and want to always hang around. Yeah, for sure. For sure. You could do the right thing. You can handle a situation, you can solve a problem and then say, but yeah, I'm not necessarily gonna spend all my time with this person and hang out with them and become buddy-buddy. But at least some of those negative feelings will hopefully be reconciled to a degree. I think there's definitely a spectrum and a lot of shades of gray in the interim there. Yeah, I don't want to make it seem like this is something you could just wave a wand and snap fingers. If I gave that impression, I apologize, but like it's something we should strive for, and it takes a lot of different episodes, and you slowly and gradually work your way towards it.
It reminds you, when you hear Holocaust survivors say, I forgive, they just kind of wonder, like, how could you and why would you forgive? But they're saying it helps them move on.
Right. That we agree.
Yeah,
That we
our
agree
rest
for
of the
sure.
life, you're not gonna go be friends with them, but some part of them, I guess, feels a release from the forgiveness.
Yeah.
Not that they're gonna be friends, you're right, they're never gonna
Right.
really, like,
Yes.
I guess forgiveness is not meaning
Yeah.
really forgive, but in a way,
Yeah.
it releases them too, so.
Agreed. That's why I tried to present a lot of different approaches and a lot of different angles as to why we would do this and what kind of benefits it can give us. In certain situations, I think it could also help us to repair relationships as
And
well.
they're saying it helps them.
Yeah.
I don't get it, but it kind of does, so.
So we'll give it a try. Yeah.
Working on-
Sometimes it can get to, and sometimes it can get to a point where it could just be, and no way, by the way, are these things very simple, but the next time you're in a situation where you have to be face to face with somebody who isn't your number one person, maybe this idea resonates and you say, okay, maybe I can come together at least to work together, and maybe I'll feel something a little bit different. I'll feel a little bit better about this person than when we started. And that's a step. That's a big step. Not an easy thing to do. So hopefully we work towards turning negative people into positive people and building those positive emotions about us. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much.